Continuing on with the Norwegian Krag restoration, I completed the front handguard here. I didn't film it as the process is the same as shaping the fore end of the stock. Rough cut on the bandsaw, knock the corners down with the chisel, shape both ends to fit the bands, and then carefully bring the middle down to dimension with the spoke shave, checking every so often with the ruler. I haven't stained it yet to check for any imperfections, and I'll do that when I have a larger area shaped. The middle band holds both handguards, front and back on. They meet under the middle. This later style of band has a hinge at the top, so it drops on from up above. There needs to be a relief cut on the top for the hinge, which I cut right here. It's just invisible with the band on. The rear handguard will have a matching cut, except on the front where it goes under the band. To determine the width that the stock needs to be, at least on this side with the magazine sticking out, what I could do is just take a pencil and lightly just draw on the bottom here and on the sides, and then transfer the action over to the new stock and then see where these marks ends up. Right now I'm just going to go off of the widest point. Keep the sides square so I can cut these finger grooves here. I'm going to wager this is pretty tough to see on camera, but there's two lines right there. The inside is the sporter stock and the outside is the new stock, so that's how much the new stock needs to go down, is the difference between the two. And then here on the front as well, it's more material to remove. Now on the bottom, again, tough to see, but it's pretty close to where it needs to be, so I'll leave that as is, just work on the sides. To determine the correct width on the other side, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my calipers and measure the depth on the rear of the magazine. I'm working with a rounded shape, so I'm trying to look straight down about what the thickness would be, because I still want to maintain the square sides on the new stock. So rear of the magazine right about 0.26. In front tapers down, so it's going to be right around 0.165. So I'll transfer the action over to the new stock and mark those points. You can see I went a little wide with my inletting here, so there's a small gap between the receiver and this sidewall. But luckily it doesn't look like it'll affect it. 0.165 at the front. It's going to do a light scratch down the wood. And then 0.26 at the back. and I'll fill those in with pencil to make them more visible. And then it's a matter of the chisel. Because I'm not going right to the steel, I could do this with the action in. It'll make it easier to check as I go. So I'm just outside of the lines front and back. I'll relieve this middle area off camera and match up those 2 points just to give me a completely flat side where it should be. Okay, so now that I have these points fixed from here, the front of the receiver, to the band, I could work in between them. I still want to stick with these squared up sides here because that'll help me when I run the router for the finger grooves. Then from there I could shape the rest of the curves, but I want to stick with the straight sides for now. And what I want to do is I'm going to take a hand plane, I'm just going to plane from here to here, match up these 2 points. On the stock it's straight, it actually dips a little bit in this area, it gets a little dip down, so I can do that later. Here's an interesting setup, but I have the stocks aligned one on top of the other, lined up here, just where the chamber is. And I'm just gonna transfer over the extent of the grasping grooves here. It's hard to see where they end, so I'm just running my finger over it. I'm going to mark both the full depth and right where it tapers off. So this is the full depth. I can just feel with my finger, and then this is where it tapers off. Of course it'll be a little bit different because the stock has been sanded a little, but as close as I can get it is good. And from there I'll just set up my router jig and run those down. Here's my setup for cutting grasping grooves on the side of the stock. I have 2 extra pieces of wood to just give me more of a stable platform so the router won't rock back and forth. And I have a small fence bolted to the back of the router to be able to cut the groove along the top of the stock here, make sure it's straight. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the depth now. So this depth guide on the router, that goes in 1/8 inch increments. I don't want to go to a full 1/8 inch. I'm going to take this thin ruler that's 10/1000ths. I'm going to put it under the bit, and then that way when I go down a step on this depth gauge, it's going to cut 0.115 deep. I'm going to go in a couple increments there and take it easy on the edges so it doesn't burn. Alright, there's the result. There's the grasping grooves cut. I think I did a pretty good job. It's no burn marks or anything on the edges. It's smooth. Just needs a light sanding. I just wanted to say the reason why I cut them when I cut them is because if I waited until after I rounded this and shaped the fore end here, is I wouldn't have an easy way of setting up a jig like I did. So doing it squared here, it's a lot easier to set up a jig, have a nice solid base for the router and prevent it from wandering off at all. So now I could start shaping the fore end.